Hello and welcome to Stumped Down the Lakeside, the cricket discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm your host Chukka Wilson. Welcome to the program. The problem with all examples of drugs or chemical manipulations in the brain is that there is a finite amount of effect that it will have before it wears off, and then you have to go again and take the same substance. But over time, the effectiveness is decreasing, which means you have to, if you want to gain the same effect, double down and increase the amount that you're consuming in order to get the same effect, and eventually you get so desensitized that no matter how much of this substance you consume, it has no effect on you, and then you have lost your interest in this thing. And that is just a general rule, that raw emotional chemical manipulation is such a difficult idea to try to focus on and invest in, because the more you invest in it, the more you focus on it, the lower your return will be, because people will get used to it, people will feel less enthralled, and it will feel less novel, and it eventually will just peter out and evaporate. And that's just a general rule. When you look at different industries, there's this same contradiction, the contradiction between the emotional quick return, quick satisfaction, the thrill, and then on the other hand, the slow build-up of detail and rational contemplation and thought. And unless this balance is figured out, the industry falls apart. So because there's constantly this market pressure to increase revenue and increase market share and increase attendance, the people who run the industries and who produce the content are constantly in search of finding ways that allow them to make something more thrilling and interesting. And so the pressure is to make it more full of emotional manipulation, more basic humanistic reactions, and less about rational contemplation and detailed, careful thinking, which are very boring when you first look at them. And so in every industry you can think of, the pressure of increasing the amount of emotional manipulation and the more basic rudimentary instincts goes up, and then there's a decrease in the substantive content. In movies, the actual plot, where you develop storylines, you get interesting characters, you sympathize with them, you go on the journey of who they are and what they're doing, is very slow and boring. But the chase scenes and the blood and the guts and the sex and the nudity, that is the exciting stuff. And so in mainstream Hollywood, there is this constant pressure in movie producers and directors and editors to decrease the amount of plot and character development, which are boring and are going to get less interest, and much more of an increase in the raw violence and nudity and the thrill of the emotional climax. And then movie critics will point out that Hollywood movies are so shallow and boring because they follow a very same formula. It's a cookie cutter system. Every dozen of Hollywood movies could be swapped for another dozen, and you would not notice the difference. The same problem is in journalism. The actual core of journalism is rather boring in terms of investigative journalism, to find out hidden details. It's all about going undercover, collecting sources, following money trails, following loose leads. It's very slow and tedious. It often gets you nowhere, and it requires a lot of concentration to remember where everything is and what everything is happening. And then on the other hand, the content in the media which is both easiest to produce and gets the most attention are things like celebrity gossip, reproducing media releases that you get from the government. The thing about celebrity gossip is that it again appeals to base instincts about someone's personal life and trying to spread rumours about what's happening, and it tends to be very popular on the internet because it's often organised on a clickbait system, and people become attracted to it. And often it requires no work, because you can almost make it up and just say that sources have told you something and you can get away with it. And of course, media critics have pointed out that substantive investigative journalism is a dying profession because so much energy and time is being put into these tabloidy, cheap frills of things like clickbait, celebrity gossip, and so on. And so the constant pressure is the same. The detailed, rational contemplation is just too boring, it's too expensive to organise, and it doesn't get nearly enough eyeballs when it's done properly, which means on a cost-benefit analysis it shouldn't be there, and the pressure is then to just have your entire media production just on celebrity gossip. And so with all that background information said, the cricket is facing the same problem, and the fact that cricket also suffers this is just the fact of we're in a very difficult situation within the state of the world economy, within the state of world capitalism, where new sources of growth and profitability are decreasing, and so you have to find ways of maximizing profits where areas of new expansion are not there. And the obvious pressure is to cut costs where costs are too high, and to focus attention where your revenue gain will be at its highest. And so the pressure is therefore to move away from those forms of cricket that are not going to be as popular and interesting, that often are very slow and boring, and that requires a lot of concentration to understand, and a move towards the fast, the thrills, the raw emotional surge of seeing an event take place before your eyes. And so, over the past 30 or so years, these pressures have been building up and building up inside of world cricket, and it's clear that eventually something will have to snap. Right now, the snapping has not happened, and it's not yet reached the high-intensity pressure where the snap could be predicted to happen within 12 or 24 months. But the snap is on the cards. As these pressures build up inside of world cricket, more and more administrators, more and more advertisers, and more players will get the idea that the slower forms of cricket, which always don't have the same high profitable feedback and yet are very expensive to make, are just not worth it and they should be cut, while the form of cricket that is thrilling and exciting and fast and has a massive net return should be doubled down and increased. But like I said before, there is a law that underlies this problem, which is the declining return, that as you more and more get used to an emotional experience, either through manipulating your own emotions or taking a drug or whatever, over time your experience will be decreased, which means you have to increase the dosage in order to relive that same experience. And so you have a choice. You either become addicted to this experience, in which case you just go deeper and deeper and deeper into this world until all you can think about is having this raw emotional experience all the time, in which case you're an addict and your life has fallen apart. Or you try and get control of your life and realize that unless you portion out what you're doing, unless you try to find some sort of order, only then will you keep your life stable and sane. And so anyone who is thinking that the solution to world cricket's problems is to just maximize the raw emotionality and the raw thrill, the thing is, they think that they're coming up with some sort of innovation because they notice something, but actually they're just moving towards the direction that the wind is pushing them. The facts are that through the contradictions in the system, there is a underlying pressure to do this, so they are allowing themselves to be pushed in this direction, and then they're telling everyone what they see on the horizon, and yet they think that they're great innovators or entrepreneurs for noticing this. It's actually quite arrogant and elitist of them to think like that. But anyway, that's a side note. The important thing is that the net return will decrease. So if you try to increase the emotional raw experience of cricket at the expense of the rational contemplation, eventually cricket will fall into an addiction and it will suffer. You could almost think about how the entire sport might completely collapse if this is allowed to happen. And so, with the new summer happening, the 2017-18 summer happening, people have been throwing around a series of ideas about ways to adapt and change the sport in order to implement these sort of changes. And the first one is to have a 4-day test match. South Africa are planning to have a test match on Boxing Day against Zimbabwe, but they don't want it to be a 5-day test match because 5-day test matches are too expensive, and it's just not interesting enough of a game because it's one of the best teams in the world versus one of the worst, and so you're going to get a very small fan and viewership. The TV deal will not be good, and yet the costs of maintaining the ground and paying the players will still be there, and so it's just not worth it. And so they've approached the ICC and they said, let's have a 4-day test match instead. Similarly, there has been talk for a while about cutting the Sheffield Shield down from 10 matches to 8, that it's just too difficult to maintain a full season of Sheffield Shield when the Big Bash League is just so popular. And so the idea would be to cut a couple of games from the Sheffield Shield, and that would allow the Big Bash League to expand for maybe a fortnight. And then we've been hearing talk about introducing new leagues that are shorter than 2020 cricket, like 10-10 and 5-5, and all these managers and officials or former players are throwing up these ideas about alternative tournament structures that are shorter than 2020 cricket. Apparently the 2020 version is just too long and too mundane for everyone now, that fans have gotten too used to it over the course of now 14 years. And so the idea is to try to go for the next big thing, the next great innovation that'll transform cricket. And so all sorts of these wild ideas about having tiny little tournaments of thrilling, very short cricket are being thrown around, and people have been suggesting, of course, that all test matches might need to be reduced to 4 days, and then you've got also the idea of, although it's a little bit different, you've also got the idea of day-night test cricket, which seems to have been a success, but not such a thrilling success that it overwhelms and transforms the game. Day-night test matches are nice and good, they're interesting, but they haven't been overwhelmingly successful in comparison to normal test matches, and so in terms of entrepreneurship, they've been a failure, even though in terms of adding to the quality of test cricket, they've actually been a success. Now, all of these proposed changes are essentially the same idea, that first-class versions of cricket are too expensive and too boring to bother with and should be cut down, while the more shorter, thrilling, raw emotional experience should be increased and doubled down. So it seems as though cricket is caught in the same death spiral that the media is and that Hollywood is. It doesn't know how to escape this because it is constantly pressured to increase profits and increase growth, but of course that would mean cutting down on the expensive costs while maximizing and emphasizing the sources of great profitability. And so the natural forces are pushing them in this direction, and the contradictions are becoming stronger and stronger, and over time they might become overwhelming. And then what will administrators do? Now let's just be clear about something. The idea of there being some sort of traditionalist view of cricket is an absurdity. The fact of the matter is that over the course of the last 400 or so years, ever since the sport was invented, cricket has evolved and changed. It has never stayed the same. It has always been adapting according to our times. The type of cricket that was played by Wisden, or by Bradman, or by W.G. Grace, or by Richie Benaud, or by Jack Hobbs is totally different. And so there's no point in holding on to some sort of ideal version of cricket that has to be played simply because it's existed for time immemorial. The fact of the matter is that there's no such eternal form of cricket that goes beyond the realm of history. Cricket is an historical sport, grounded in the realities of society. It's not something that goes back to ancient times and goes back to the very nature of humans and the human experience and human nature, as if that's some sort of unchanging, static phenomenon. And so the facts are, if you want to change cricket, if you want to adapt it to be something else, you're perfectly free to do that. But the question is, what are the reasons behind this change? Is this being done for the right reasons, or are we falling down the same death spiral that a lot of other industries are currently as world capitalism journalism heads deeper and deeper into this long-term crisis. And so I can't imagine any good coming out of this situation. The thing that makes cricket a unique sport is the core substantive content of bat versus ball. Batsmen trying to score runs and bowlers trying to take wickets. And so it is the attempt of these two forces combating each other to see who will win, which makes cricket a fascinating sport. And for a long time, the guardian of this great experience was first-class cricket, because the game is slower, because highlights and amazing events are less common. It means that there's more of an emphasis on the slower elements of the game, such as concentration, such as patience, waiting until your enemy is tired and then jumping on them. And so those core elements of cricket that make it a unique sport are the very things that make it boring, and it's quite a contradiction here. So if you just transformed cricket so that it only existed within the realms of raw emotional experience, which would be boundaries and wickets, then you've actually lost the substance of the game that you're actually playing. It's only through the boring elements of cricket that the exciting elements can have any meaning, and it's only through the boring elements of cricket, the tedious singles and the dot balls and leaving the ball to go to the keeper, it's only through that stuff that the core technical and rational elements of the game can come to the surface, and we can see how exciting and professional and amazing this sport is. And so if cricket was moving in a particular direction which necessitated changing some of the rules and some of the structures and some of the lengths of how games are played, that's perfectly fine. I would welcome it. If people said that they wanted first-class cricket to be shifted from 4 days to 3 days, or limited overs one-day games to be shifted from 50 overs to 70 overs, that would be perfectly fine. If this improved the quality of cricket, then I'm all in favour of it. But it's quite clear that these people who are proposing cutting test matches to 4 days, abandoning 2020 cricket and going to 10-10 cricket, of just ignoring 50-over cricket, they do not have the best interests of cricket at hand. They are just following the normal pressures of the market that capitalism is driving cricket, and they are actually contributing to the death spiral of cricket rather than helping it get out of it. And that's of course the key. If you want to help keep cricket alive for the next 50 years, you have to make sure that it does not continue down the death spiral and that it stays stable and positive into the future. Like I said before, if you have any sort of raw emotional experience, it will decrease its effectiveness over time. Whether you're talking about emotions or drugs or anything else, the power that it has over your experience decreases over time, and so you have to increase it. And so if world cricket becomes addicted to the fast and ridiculously short forms of the game, then we will be witnessing the end of the sport. Instead, we have to recognise that for cricket to remain a high-class professional sport that is admired and respected, that people want to play, it's through the professionality of the actual substantive content that makes this so, which only comes through playing the game in a serious and substantive and core manner, and that can only come through actually having the boring elements of cricket there, even if they don't have the same net return. That's the only solution to any of these problems. To solve the problem with the media, you can't just allow tabloid and celebrity gossip and clickbait to rule over you, otherwise you will destroy media. You have to go through the expensive and lengthy and boring process of investigative journalism, because that provides the real substantive meaning behind your industry, because no one will be bothered paying attention to journalism if it's all just nonsense and cheap frills and just junk. So even if it gives you a net loss, even if it's very expensive and few people will click onto it, and then it won't have any substantive meaning in the long term in terms of your profitability margins, you just have to invest in good investigative journalism. The same goes for Hollywood. If Hollywood continues down this path of just continuously emphasizing the blood and guts and sex and nudity and neglecting telling good stories, then people will stop going to the movies, and people will stop paying attention to what Hollywood are doing because they've already seen it all before, and they will not see anything new this time, and so they won't be bothered. And so the only way you're going to maintain a loyal consumer base for Hollywood movies into the future is if you regain and rebuild and return to what makes movies so terrific, which is storytelling and characters, and actually building up tension and looking at the difficulties of the human experience and the contradictions. It's very boring, it's very expensive to do, and no one will thank you for it, but it has to be done. And that's the solution to cricket. That is the solution to keeping cricket safe and preventing it from collapsing within the next 20 years. Maintain the substantive content of cricket. How that happens, I'm not going to say. I'm not even going to say that first-class cricket has to be the number one form of the game. It could move to the 50-over form of the game. The point I'm making is that the substantive content of cricket, which is boring, which is tedious, which is dot balls, which is singles, has to be maintained in whatever form it needs to in order for the real professionality of the sport to maintain its position within world sport. Any attempt at diving headfirst into the world of raw, cheap, emotional thrills and reaching the point where the entire cricket of summer is just short 5-over games and 10-over games full of boundaries and wickets, it might be really thrilling for a short while, but then people will get used to it, people will get comfortable with that emotional experience, and there'll be no way to increase it. There'll be no way to increase that dosage because you've maxed out. You're an addict. You're addicted to the raw emotional thrills of cricket. You've lost all proportionality. You've lost your sense of identity, and you have reached the bottom of your death spiral. That will be the end of cricket. The only way to prevent that is to hold on tight to the substantive content of cricket, which is the detailed, boring contemplation. Yes, it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be boring. No one's going to thank you for it. No one will care. You'll get less viewers. The advertisers won't care. And in the end, people will keep pressuring you to just cut this adrift and let it die. And it's only by holding on to that, only by holding on to the substantive content of cricket, will it survive. And just to re-emphasise, I'm not going to be saying what the substantive content of cricket needs to be, because cricket can evolve over time, because there was a time when the county circuit had 3-day first-class matches, but we had timeless test matches. I'm not going to say that we need to go back to timeless test matches, or that they need to be all 2-day first-class matches. Cricket should evolve naturally through the organic processes of the sport being played by more people across the world over the course of time. Only then will we get to see the true richness of the sport as its position within the human experience, because that is of course what makes cricket so great. Cricket is a human sport, it's a historical sport, it has roots deep inside of human society and the way that humans experience life and see themselves. And as long as cricket can tie itself to genuine human fascination and contemplation and mystery and curiosity, then it will be safe. If cricket decides to abandon this sort of humanistic element of the sport and instead dives into this shallow and superficial world of raw emotional thrills that go away after a couple of seconds, then it will disappear. And right now, as world capitalism goes into a crisis, as old cultures collapse and die, as everything we knew about our lives is changing and disappearing, and as the world heads towards bigger and bigger wars and bigger misery, cricket might well go the same way. We might see cricket die in the same way that other cultures across the world have. I don't want that to happen, but there is a good chance that that will happen if we can't wrestle back control and stop the market forces from pushing world cricket into this death drive.
And that's the end of the program. You've been listening to Stumped Down the Leg Side, the cricket discussion show on Bizz 99.9 FM Substitute Radio. I'm Chukka Wilson. Until next time, keep practicing, keep your eye on the ball, and remember to turn your wrists.